There are several reasons why I wanted to speak to you this morning. When Steve mentioned that they were looking for somebody to step in, I reached out to Steve as fast as I could and said, please allow it to be me. First and foremost, is to say thank you to you all. Both everyone here, everyone online, friends, family, co-workers. The reach out to me and to my family has been unbelievable. I'm sure, Brother Peter, you know what it feels like. It's remarkable how many cards, letters, texts, calls. I thought Butchie writing the sky thing was a little much, but everything else was wonderful. And I can't tell you how much strength it gives us in our time of need. So let's always keep that up, brothers and sisters. It means a lot. The second reason I wanted to speak to you this morning is because I don't know when the next time will be. It'll come somewhere down the line, not forever, but a period of time. Tomorrow I have some appointments that'll give me the update on what my procedures will be and when they'll take place and all that sort of stuff. So I wanted to take the opportunity one more time to speak to you because being up here is what I live for, talking to you about the love of God and all that He has done for us. So I wanted to be here for that. And so I do want to talk about this morning about this sending out of the 70 and compare and contrast it with the sending out of the 12. And maybe we can learn some lessons about what it's all about. And in that Wednesday night class, Lewis Vincent's Wednesday night class, where I spoke for a few minutes, I pointed out that I used to, and many of you already know this, I used to work at a resort down on Cape Cod. And we had this group that came in. It was a Jewish group. Many people from New York. It was about 400 people, all families, and they came to the resort for 8 days. I think it was 8 days. It might have been 9, but I think it was 8, to celebrate the Passover. It was called Pesach, which is the Jewish word, I think, for Passover. And so they came for 8 days to the resort to celebrate the Passover, to as close as they could come to the rules and regulations and traditions of the Passover. And so everything, or most things that happen in the Passover is what they tried to do. So, for instance, we had to kosherize the kitchen because the kitchen at this resort was not kosherized. So you had to kosher the kitchen. You had to use specific plates. There had to be water stations throughout the facility for hand washing stations. There were certain, foods that you had to prepare. They had to be prepared a certain way. They had to be served a certain way. There were certain wines that had to be served. They had to be served a certain way. Everything had to be done a very specific way so that they could follow what they believed the Passover was in as many of rigid form as they possibly could. The best that they felt like they could keep the Passover. And I pointed out in this class that it wasn't just a Passover, it was also Sabbaths. So there were a couple Sabbaths in there as well, and there are very specific rules to following the Sabbath. And so I'll tell you a couple interesting stories. One of them I told on that Wednesday, but this one I didn't. I had a situation where I was going by where the front desk is to check people in, and there was an older couple there. And they were arriving just as the Passover was about to begin. And so they were stuck because there are certain things you can't do on the Passover. You can't carry a burden, right? And so they were stuck checking into the hotel, but they had luggage. But they couldn't carry the luggage because that would be bearing a burden. So they asked me, because I happened to be walking by, could you help them with their luggage and check them into their room? And I said, sure. So I took their luggage and I brought them to their room. And there's those key card deals, well, they can't use those because it's against the Sabbath. So I had to use the key card, open the door for them, go inside, turn on all the lights, open their luggage, and leave the door to the hotel room open Otherwise, they would get stuck in their room because they couldn't open the door. So if I was to close the door, they'd be stuck in there till the end of the Sabbath. And it's not like they could call the hotel and say, could you come and open the door? Because they can't use the phone. So they were very, very trapped within the laws of the Sabbath. And I told the other story, which was I was walking by this flight of stairs that goes down to where the meals are. And there was a young couple there with a baby, and they were stuck. And the reason that they were stuck was they could carry the baby down the stairs to get to the meal, but they had a stroller. And they couldn't move the stroller. They couldn't pick it up because that would be bearing a burden. So they were basically stuck at the top of the stairs, not knowing what to do. There was actually an elevator right there to the left, but they couldn't use the elevator. So they're standing there, this poor couple is standing there at the top of the stairs saying, what do we do? I mean, I suppose you could have, kicked the stroller down the stairs, but, those things are expensive. Well, at that moment, I happened to step by. And they said, could you please carry the stroller down the stairs? And I said, sure. I was younger then. So I had to carry the stroller down the stairs just so they could get to their meal. So this is the burden or the trap that they had to follow these rules in order for what they felt was the keeping of the Passover. And I pointed out on that Wednesday night that there was another gentleman there who was also Jewish, who was not keeping the Passover the way that they were. In fact, if you asked him, he'd probably say he wasn't keeping the Passover at all, but actually he was. In actual fact, he was keeping the Passover closer to what the Passover was supposed to be about than what they were doing. Because he was there for only one reason, and that is that his son was the guy who was running the group. And so he came to the Passover to help his son. And so while they were following all the rules of the Passover and all the rules of the Sabbath, he was working. He wasn't getting paid. He was simply there to serve his son and make his son's life easier. And I realized about halfway through the week that here's a guy who's closer to keeping the Passover than all these 400 people following all these rules. And that's actually where I ended on Wednesday night, and I immediately got a text from Brother David Levin saying, what are you talking about? He wasn't rude by any stretch of imagination. But I want to show you what I'm talking about. And I want to show you if you'll turn with me, if you feel so inclined, to Exodus chapter 12. And look what it says in Exodus chapter 12. And this is about the Passover. And just to set the stage, at the beginning of Exodus chapter 12, it talks about taking a lamb, 1 year old, without spot or without blemish, and killing the lamb, right, sacrificing the lamb, and then taking the blood, right, and rubbing the blood on the doorposts. Right, that's what they were to do to prepare for the Passover. I want to pick up something in verse 14 first before we get to the key. But look what it says in verse 14. It says, and this shall be unto you for a memorial, and you shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever. And what I want to point out here is that word keep. That word keep there means to do. Right? He's saying, this is what you need to do. You are going to do this. That's what that word keep there. It's a specific word. That's what that means. Now I want to pick up in verse 23. And it says this. It says, for the Lord shall pass through to smite the Egyptians. And when he seeth the blood upon the lintel and on the two side posts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not suffer the destroyer to come into your houses and smite you. And you shall observe this thing for an ordinance to the end, ordinance to thee and to thy sons forever. And it shall come to pass when you come to the land which the Lord give you according to what he has promised, that ye shall keep this service. And it shall come to pass when children say unto you, what mean ye by this service? You shall say, it is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, who passed over the houses of the children of Egypt when he smote the Egyptians. Passed over the children of Israel in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians, and delivered our houses, and the people bowed the head and worshipped. Now you see that word, keep. And when first of all, pick up verse 24. And when you shall observe this thing for an ordinance to keep to thee and to thy sons forever, it shall come to pass that when you come to the land which the Lord shall give you, according as he hath promised, ye shall keep this service. You know, that's a different word. That's not the same word as in verse 14. Because that's not what this word means. It means to keep it, you ought to do it. But it's more than just doing it. It's understanding why you're doing it. You see that word in verse 24 that says, you shall observe this thing? That's the same word. So you don't just keep the Passover. You don't just do it. You have to understand why you're doing it and what the emphasis of it is in order to keep it properly. That's what it's saying right there. You need to keep it. Notice what it says up above. And the Lord shall pass through to smite the Egyptians. This is verse 23. And when he seeth the blood on the lintel and the two side posts, the Lord will pass over the door. The Lord will pass over the door and will not suffer the destroyer to come into your houses to smite you. You know what that's saying? That's saying the destroyer has every right to smite you. It's what you were talking about in the Sunday school this morning. Every right to smite you. The only reason he's not going to smite you is the Lord's not going to allow it to happen. Otherwise, the destroyer would smite every one of the firstborn of Israel, just like the firstborn of Egypt, except the Lord says no. It's not you. It's him. Do you see that? It's quite clear. But then look what it says a little bit further on. In verse 27. Pick up in verse 26. Just for clarity. And it shall come to pass, when your children say unto you, what is this about? Why do we do this? What is this? Ye shall say, it is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover. You see that expression, the Lord's Passover? You know, if you go to the Gospel of John, there's 3 Passovers in the Gospel of John. And in each one of them, John calls it a Passover of the Jews, or the Jews' Passover. Why does he call it the Jews' Passover? Because it's not the Lord's Passover. It's the Jews' Passover. They're not following the Passover the way the Lord wants it to be followed. They're following it the way that they think they should be following it. So he calls it the Jews' Passover. Even the final Passover, he calls the Jews' Passover because they didn't recognize the Lord Jesus Christ. But this is the Lord's Passover. But it's even more than that. Notice what it says. It is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover. That's what this is. So what's the sacrifice? Well, that's the lamb that they killed. You know, the doorpost on the lintel, all that was a sign that the sacrifice had taken place. It was the sacrifice that saved them. Now we know what the sacrifice is because we know that Lord Jesus Christ is the Passover sacrifice. But if you didn't know that, and this is all you knew, you ought to know that it is about the Lord's sacrifice. I gave my only begotten Son, whatever that is, and not themselves. You know why? Because it says this. Who shall pass over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt. Well, why does it tell us in Egypt? Obviously, they're in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians. Why does it specifically say in Egypt? When you explain to your children, make sure you emphasize that we were in Egypt when this took place. Why? What does Egypt represent? Well, it actually represents 2 very important things. First of all, Egypt is the place of the flesh. I pointed that out, I don't know how many times, right? It's the place. It's easy to know that Egypt represents the will of the flesh because they got monuments to the will of the flesh that have been there for 4,000 years. So you know what it's about. But it's more than that even. They were slaves in Egypt. They had no freedom in Egypt. They couldn't do what they wanted. They had rules they had to follow. They had things they had to do. They had no choice in the matter. It was not free will in Egypt. They were slaves. Now think about these poor people at the Passover down the cave. All they've done is replace the slavery in Egypt to the slavery of the law. You can't go down a flight of stairs. You can't close a whole hotel room door. You are just slaves to another institution. That's all you are. Now think of the man that was there. He wasn't a slave to anything. He didn't have to eat this meal at this certain time. He didn't have to do any of those things. As long as what he was doing was serving others. That's exactly what God does here. By his grace, by his love, he brings them out of Egypt. Not because it was necessarily right, on the sense of right, because they were just as worthy of death as anybody else. But God chose them by his grace to save them and bring them out of Egypt. Boy, that should speak to us. That should speak so deeply and so truly to our calling in Jesus Christ. Because we are no worthy of this incredible hope that carries us each and every day than a slave in Egypt. But God has called us out. So that's why he was celebrating the Passover or keeping the Passover closer than they were. He certainly wasn't Christian. He didn't understand what Jesus represented. He didn't know any of that stuff. But he knew he loved his son. And he knew he could be there and help his son, even if he wasn't keeping all these rules and all these regulations. So that's why I made that point. Now I want to keep this in mind as we turn over to Luke chapter 10 and what goes on there, because there's an important, I think, contrast. Actually, it's a contrast that I think we're directed to see between the sending out of the 70 in Luke 10 and the sending out of the 12 in Luke 9. So let's pick it up just in the first verse. It says, after these things, the Lord appointed 70 also, or 72. Nate did a very nice job of explaining it could be one or the other. We're not going to go down that. We're just going to call it the 70. And if you have an issue with that, I don't care. After these things. After what things? Well, I mean, it could be after the very things at the very end of Luke chapter 9. It could be after Luke chapter 9. It could be after the very beginning of the gospel, for all we know, except that it tells us after what things. Because it says, and appointed other 70 also. So it tells us specifically what these things are representing. I sent out the 12 in Luke chapter 9. Now, after that, I'm going to send out these 70 also. So we know what the contrast is. Now, as Nate pointed out, Luke 10 is the only place where you learn about the sending out of the 70. It's not in any of the other Gospels. In fact, the sending out of the 12, which is found in Matthew and is found in Mark and is found in Luke, isn't in John at all. John doesn't talk about the sending out of anybody, at least not in this context. But here's the one place why it talks about the sending out of the 70. And the reason that Nate pointed out, and he is correct, is because the 12 represent one thing and the 70 represents something else. The 12 represents the children of Israel. Right? There are 12 tribes. There are 12 disciples who are going to be, overseeing the 12 tribes of Israel, judges of the 12 tribes of Israel. We know that 12 represents the nation of Israel. We understand that. And that's what the 12 represent. What does 70 represent? 70 represents the nations. 70 represents the Gentiles. That's what the 70 represents. There were 70 nations at the time. This is, again, Nate pointed out, there were 70 nations that went out after the time of Noah. We get the list of names, you count the list of places, you count them up, it's 70. Or, as Nate pointed out, it could be 72. So that's what the 70 represents. And he appointed 70 also. We never know what their names are. We're never told who these 70 are. And one of the corollary accounts to the sending out of the 12, the context specifically tells us who the 12 are. It names the 12. Now, of course, we know the 12, but it names the 12. I think it's in Matthew, but it might be Mark. He names the 12, and then he sends out the 12. So we're told specifically who the 12 are. We're never told who the 70 are. And he sent them out 2 by 2 to every city and place whither he himself would come. Well, that's different than the sending out of the 12, right? Because here it says, 2 by 2 into every city and place whither he himself would come. But the sending out of the 12, remember, was much, much more specific. Right? In the sending out of the 12, and I think it was in, I forget which gospel it was in, but he's very specific that he says to them, you are not to go to the Gentiles, you're not to go to the Samaritans, you are only to go to the lost tribe of the children of Israel. You're only to go to the Jews. That's the commandment of the 12. You only go to the Jews. That's not what it says here. He sent them out 2 by 2 into every city and place whither he himself would come. Well, we know he went to more places than just to the Jews. If nothing else, we know he went to Samaria. In fact, we know he went to Samaria twice. So they must have gone to Samaria. And in fact, we can even look at this as a bigger picture and say, well, in actual fact, if we don't know who the 70 are, every place in city where Jesus goes, well, that's the whole world, right? So in a bigger context, it's really everywhere. But in this context, we at least know they had to go to more than just to just the Jews, right? They went to the Decapolis, they went to Perea, they went to all these places where the Gentiles were as well, but that's not what the 12 were told. And then it goes through all these, rules and regulations as to what you should do. Go to a house and stay in that house. Eat what they give you. If nobody lets you in, brush off the dust. All that stuff is really very much the same between the sending out of the 12 and the sending out of the 70. The rules and regulations are what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to do it and preach the kingdom of God. There's really no difference between those things, the way it's laid out. Why? Why aren't those things different? Well, because preaching the kingdom is preaching the kingdom. It doesn't matter whether you're preaching it to the Jews or preaching it to the Gentiles. Same with healing of the sick. Right? There's no change. But there's going to be a change. And the change is the response to going out. That's where the change really comes in. Because go back to Luke chapter 9 and look what happens in Luke chapter 9. And again, I know I pointed this out at Nate's class. So if you weren't listening at Nate's class or you weren't there, it doesn't matter to you. If you heard me say it before, well, then just pretend you didn't. That's all. And it's in Luke chapter 9. I want to pick up, I've actually lost the verse where they come back. Luke chapter 9, verse 6. And this is about the sending out of the 12. And they departed and went through the towns, preaching the gospel and healing everywhere. Picking up in verse 10. And the apostles, when they returned, told him all that they had done. And he took them and went aside privately into a desert place belonging to the city called Bethsaida. And then eventually, of course, he crosses the Sea of Galilee with them. So they come back and they say, this is everything we've done. This is what happened. Nothing really all that wrong with that. Sounds perfectly fine. That makes perfect sense. But then it says Jesus takes them away privately. Why? Well, we're told in another gospel why he sends them off privately in one of the corollary accounts to the sending out of 12. And what that tells us is he says, listen, I'm going to take you privately because you need to rest. because they were exhausted from their going out. Jesus could see they were tired. They were worn out. It was difficult work to go from city to city to do these things and to heal the sick and to preach the gospel. They needed to get away, to have some private time, some quiet time. And then what happens is he tries to take them away. Eventually they get on the boat to go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And when they get there, there's the 5,000. Right? So Jesus says he had compassion upon them. And so they weren't getting any rest at all. They had to feed 5,000. And you remember in the story, he says to the disciples, we'll feed them. And they say, how can we feed them? We don't have food for 5,000. All we have is 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Well, they had just performed all kinds of miracles. And yet they couldn't look outside the box and say, listen, it's all the same thing. So that's basically what Jesus says to them. He says, it's all really the same thing. Bring me the 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And they feed them. And then from there they go on and they have the Mount of Transfiguration, right? This marvelous event. And Peter says, let's build 3 tabernacles. And God comes down and says, you don't need 3 tabernacles. All you need is him. Moses and Elijah are there for Jesus. They're not there for you. You don't need them. You got him. Listen to him. And then from there, they have the situation when they come back from coming down the mountain where they meet the guy who says, my son's a lunatic. He's crazy. And your disciples couldn't help him. And Jesus says, this evil and perverse generation, how long do I have to suffer you? And he says, bring the boy to me. And they bring the boy, and he says to the father, how long has he been like this? And the father says, since his youth. Why does it tell us that? Well, it tells us that for this reason. This isn't about sin. This boy has been doing this since long before he would be held responsible for his actions, since he was a youth. This isn't about sin. But mercy is all the disciples understood. So they couldn't heal him. Because just like, remember the Canaanite woman? The Canaanite woman comes to Jesus and he says, Lord, thou son of David, have mercy upon me. And Jesus won't talk to her. Why not? Because she's a Canaanite. It's not mercy she needs, it's help she needs. So she goes away, and when she comes back, what does she come back and say? Lord, help me. Now Jesus can help her. It's the same thing here. Nobody needed to be forgiven for this. Like the blind man. Remember the blind man born blind? And they said, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he born blind? Jesus says, neither. It's not about sin. This isn't about sin either. And so they say to him, why couldn't we heal him? He said, what you need is prayer and fasting. Why prayer and fasting? Because prayer is about turning to God. Lord, help me. Fasting is about denying the flesh. This is not about us. This is about him. That's why they couldn't heal him. But they didn't understand that. The event that they had just gone through didn't teach them that. This tired, difficult situation. Now, consider what happens with the 70. Verse 17 of Luke chapter 10. Look at the difference. We said the disciples came back and they told them everything that they had done. That's okay. But this is what happened when the 70 came back. Verse 17. And the 70 returned again with joy, saying, Lord, even the devils are subject unto us through thy name. They came back and said, this is what we did. The 70 came back and said, this is what we can do in your name. And with joy and excitement, this is what they said. And you see that word devil there? You know how the disciples couldn't cast out the devil out of the boy? Same word. So the disciples couldn't cast the devil out of the lunatic child, and the 70 come back and say, even the devils are subject unto us in your name. You see the difference? And in the case of the 12, Jesus takes them out and takes them to places to get rest. And this is what Jesus says to the 70. He said unto them, verse 18, I beheld, and Satan as lightning falling from heaven. How powerful is that? Satan like lightning falling from heaven. All the power of Satan to put in our hearts doubts and fears and our need to follow regulations and our need to must do this. All that stuff is struck away in a flash of lightning. You know what that represents? The trials that we go through. And you can go through trials in one of two ways. It can be like a flash of lightning that hits you, and you take it, and you get knocked down for a minute, and then you get back up and you keep on going. Or you can take it like thunder that rumbles, and you just live in fear and in doubt. What part are we, brothers and sisters, both individually, as a family, as a community? Where do we stand when it comes to the trials that we go through? Whatever those trials are, we all have them. I have had them, I'm having them, I'll have them in the future. You can't touch my hope. You can't touch it. And nobody can touch yours either. And then Jesus says this, verse 20. Notwithstanding in this rejoice not, but that the spirits are subject unto you, but rather rejoice, because your names are written in heaven. What names? We don't know the names, but they're written in heaven. What's 70? Who are the 70? You and I, brothers and sisters. We're the 70. That's why we're not told their names. We're those that take in the hope of Israel, take in this bread and this wine, because that's what he's done for us. That's our motivation every single day. It's not about having everything right. It's important to know what is right. It's important to grow in your faith and to do the right thing. But it's about the goodness of God. That's what drives us every single day. And it comes to an end at the end of chapter 10. I will finish with this, because it's so powerful that we understand this. And at the end of chapter 10, Jesus has an encounter with Martha, where she talks about Mary. And consider the difference between them. We understand it. Now it came to pass in verse 38 that he entered into a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha received him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, which also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. But Martha was cumbered about much serving, and came to him and said, Lord, dost thou not care that my sister hath left me to serve alone? Bid her therefore that she help me. And Jesus answered, said unto her, Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled in many things. Think of those those Jewish families down the Cape. Careful and troubled about so many things. That's what Martha represents. I have to do this. I need to do that. I better do this. I can't do that. But one thing is needful. And Mary hath chosen that good part, which shall not be taken away. While were yet sinners, Christ died for us. We partake of this bread and this wine, the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, Because God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth on him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. This is our hope and desire. And we, like the 70, should rejoice with joy that we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us.
Thank you for listening to the Good Christadelphian Talks podcast. We hope this talk helped you in your walk and brightened your day. If you would like to hear more, please subscribe for new episodes. We are on all major podcast platforms and also on YouTube. If you enjoyed this particular talk, please share it with someone else who you think might enjoy it too. For show notes on the talk you just listened to, visit our website at GoodChristadelphianTalks.com or check out the show notes section of your podcast player. Please share your thoughts on the talk from this week on our Facebook or Instagram pages where we are at Good Christadelphian Talks, or leave a comment on our YouTube channel where these talks are posted as well. If you enjoy listening to the talks that we post and hear one that you think we should share, please tell us about it. You can send us a suggestion using the Contact Us tab on our website or message us on any of our social media accounts. Thank you for listening. God bless, and talk to you next week.